So before we begin, I want to say how meaningful these conversations feels to me. As musicians, we often meet in concerts, master classes, or rehearsals, and always moving forward. But it's rare that we pause and reflect on the journey itself. And I hope it won't feel like a formal interview, but rather speak freely together. So
Yes.
today, I would love for us to step back a little and to talk about how we became who we are, how we balance the many roles we carry, and where we ultimately feel we belong. So, Antonio, I would really love to begin at the very, very beginning. Um, you were born and raised in Italy. So, from a perspective, Italian culture has such a natural relationship with music, as if music is simply part of daily life. So, there seems to be an instinctive connection between Italian people and music. Perhaps that's just my impression, but I would love to hear from you. So, what was the atmosphere like? Is it the same as what I felt?
It's difficult to describe the atmosphere in the whole country when I was growing up, simply because as a child, I only knew very limitedly to my household and to my immediate surroundings. But I can tell you this, so I think every person in every part of the world, every human being is inherently musical. It is true that maybe for Italy, there was a stronger connection to a certain type of music. So when we define Western classical music, and especially when we define opera, Italy didn't just have opera. Italy also had a very strong symphonic music until the 1700s. In the 1800s, opera became the predominant art form connected to Western classical music. And yes, I think it has imbued our country, and it is something that maybe stems from our language. You know, in Italy, the piano was also invented. And, you know, this is way back in 1698 by Bartolomeo Cristofori. But the reason why it was invented was because of the noble people who had means, they had money. They had the passion of music. They wanted an instrument with keyboard that could be similar to the human voice. So to do the forte and piano, not just play the pitch of the note, but also the quality of sound. That's how piano was born. So it tells you in Italy, there was this, and opera, of course, was born in Italy, but this tells you that there is this relationship between the language, the sound, and the expression in music. So in that sense, even when I was a child, music was still felt by every person this way in my surrounding. One thing that was useful was that the national television at the time, we are talking about almost 50 years ago. At the time, national television still felt it had a cultural, educational role. It unfortunately isn't not the case anymore. But at that time, they often broadcast concertos or concerts. And, you know, because I was born in a family where no one played an instrument, my parents did not play a musical instrument. It was through television and by chance that I was exposed the first time to classical music. My parents were listening to the popular music of the time, and I liked it. Because they listened to it, I listened to it, and I sang along. And my mother tells me I was very good at singing with good pitch, even when I was extremely small, like 2, 3 years old. And so, but when I was about 3 years old, I saw this concerto, piano and orchestra. I don't know the piece. I don't know who was playing. My parents tell me that I basically froze, and I was a very restless child. But in that moment, for the duration of that broadcast, I didn't move, and I listened very carefully. And when it was over, I started crying because I didn't want it to be over. And then I started asking if I could have a keyboard to play, or I actually may have said I want a piano. I don't know. Then I started playing, pretending to play, in the air or on furniture. And so my parents bought me a keyboard, and I started playing a little bit by ear. After that, they realized that maybe this was not just a temporary thing, that I really was hoping to continue or to learn. And so they asked around to find a teacher. They found a teacher, and I started taking lessons. I mean, I remember going to this teacher's home the first time. I was about 4 years old, and the teacher was maybe, I want to say 63, 64. But to me, he looked so old because he was much older than my grandparents. And I was very intimidated. But it turns out he was a very sweet man and very patient, very good. But the first time I went there, he took a quick look at me and said, "He's too young. He'll come back next year." And so then I cried again, and I didn't do so. Yes, that's what. But this time I do remember. It's not recollection from other people; it's my own recollection. I remember he said, "Okay, if you really insist, I will give you a test, and if you pass the test, maybe you can have lessons." So the test was, I remember he turned me around and started beating some complex, first simple, then complex rhythms, and I had to repeat them. And so I did. Then he went to the piano and he played a few notes, and I was still turned around and I had to tell them what notes they were. I didn't really know the name of the notes, so I just went to the piano and played them back. And he said that then he would give me lessons. So that's when I started, and I started taking lessons twice a week, and never stopped, after that. So this was by chance, but I also wanted to say, I feel that Italy is a country with a lot of musical tradition, a lot of steeped, important connections with the history of music. However, just like many countries in the Western world, it has suffered from a deterioration that is due to mass culture, and little by little, most people now, even though their nature may still be musical, don't really know about classical music, don't really listen to classical music. It is not as pervasive as it once was. And so that's a bit sad. I do believe, from what I have seen, that there are other parts of the world, like China, for example, where there is, I don't want to say more care for it, but maybe simply because the population numbers are so much higher, but there is so many more people cultivating it and appreciating it and performing it and so on. I think this is the fault of the government in the first place, because we live in a society in Italy where the government should have a role to support education, support culture. And unfortunately, they don't do a great job of that. We have a national television channel or set of 3 channels run by the government, financed by the people's tax. That should have an educational role, and it doesn't. So, yes, it's still a very musical country, but it's not, unfortunately, the way it should be. Sometimes I travel and I feel music is appreciated more elsewhere than in Italy.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. It sounds like the piano found you very early on, and you were fascinated with it. So piano has been your part of your life ever at the age of 3. And it's somewhat surprising for classical musicians, because you mentioned that pop music was more present around you. I'm always fascinated by first teachers, because sometimes they shape us musically and sometimes psychologically. So what did you learn from that first teacher, musically or even beyond music?
Well, as I said, I was very, very little. And so at the time, I may or may not have realized most of what I'm about to tell you came later as a realization. But because my parents didn't really know the difference between excellent teacher or a bad teacher, They had to rely on other people's opinion. So it turns out that this particular teacher, his name was Vittorio Sanoner, and as I said, he was already 64. He died long ago. But it turns out he had a deep love and passion for music, but he had never really completed his musical studies in a formal way. So he wasn't a professor, and he didn't earn his living with music mainly. He had a day job. He was working in an office with the what do they call it? Basically the post office, at the post office. But he wasn't the person who went around delivering the mail. He worked in an office, but that was his 9 to 5 job. And because for many problems when he was young, he couldn't complete his studies. However, he completed his studies on his own, and he had really great knowledge of music and music theory, especially. And he was a composer and arranger, and I would say a music theorist more than anything. He could play a little bit the piano, but I never heard him play. He didn't perform. And so his teaching was very patient, as I said, and very open. He taught me mostly, and for which I'm extremely grateful, about rhythm and theory, music theory, harmony. He taught me from the get-go, from when I was 4 years old. He found a way to even make music theory interesting. And I studied with him for 7 years. That's a long time, because I could not go to conservatory, to the state school. It was not allowed until I entered middle school at 11. So from 4 to 11, I studied with this teacher. And the great thing about it, I feel, is that he gave me the tools to be a musician, in terms, as I said, of, never really having a problem with music reading. He taught me to read music so well in any clef. And also rhythm, complex rhythms, polyrhythms, in a very steady progress over these years. When I went to the state school, I never had anything to learn in music theory and rhythm. The teacher realized this, and she pulled me away from my class and made me attend more advanced lessons with adults when I was 11. But even there, I didn't have anything to learn in her class. For 3 years, I was obligated to attend that class. And I just sat by her and we chit-chatted while the other people did whatever tasks she assigned, because she knew that if she gave me any task that she gave the others, I would complete it in 2 minutes and with no mistakes. I'm not, trying to brag. It's just, this is not me. It's just the credit goes to my first teacher and to the fact that for many years, I was trained in that way. So it was really great. But piano was something else. This teacher chose, I believe, the right things for me to learn. He chose, obviously, scales and arpeggios, but he also chose etudes, like Czerny etudes, technical methods like canon. But the thing is, and also some anthology with music, really musical pieces. And over the course of the years, they got obviously more and more challenging. But he let me play roughly the way I found worked for me. So he wasn't too strict on how to sit at the piano, on how to keep my hand shaped on the piano. He was, how can I say? Yes, some general principles, but not this stifling straitjacket that would not encourage experimentation. So he encouraged me to find my way. I basically mostly developed my own finger technique and my own way to play. And he would probably give a few advice here and there if I was doing something that he felt was very much wrong. But other than that, I could basically discover my own way. And that's another thing. When I went to state school at 11, I mentioned before that my teachers in harmony and solfege, and they never found anything that I didn't already know in their curriculum. But with piano, the teacher that I changed to, the teacher that I went to when I went into the conservatory, was completely different. He was very strict, and he wanted me to keep my hand a certain shape and do certain movements with my fingers. I didn't particularly enjoy that because I felt it limited me in the production of sound. And he didn't really allow me to use my wrist when I was using my finger articulation, which I naturally was prone to do. So I would say that for the first 4 or 5 years after that, from 11 to 15, 16, I had to change my way of playing. But then the last couple of years in conservatory and all the years after, I went back to my own way and discovered even more and abandoned that approach. So I just was forced to follow it for a while. But because I was respectful of my teacher and because I was diligent in my work, but I sensed that it wasn't musical, and it wasn't. And so I'm glad that I still had memory of what I was doing before, and I could integrate naturally as I grew up new discoveries with my old. And basically, I created my own way. And I found out later, when I got exposed to other ways of playing, that my technique was maybe more international and reflected a combination of various geographical areas that I wasn't even aware of. It's a maybe combination of what some people describe as Russian technique, and with some combination of what some people describe as German technique, and some finger technique that is more Italian/French. So it has many elements, but I didn't know that at the time. For me, it's just my own way and what makes more logical sense.
And I would love to share a small story of mine, because something you mentioned reminds me of it. I was really young by that time. I was once preparing a concert where I was performing symphonic etudes of a starting by Schumann and prelude, choral, et fugue by Planck, and so on. And during winter break, which also included the Chinese New Year, I didn't take any lessons with my teacher, and the pieces were already technically secure, but I felt something was missing. So I decided away from the piano for a couple of days, like 2 or 3 days. Instead, I listened to all the musicians played and imagined their colors, texture, and so on in the music score. And when I returned it and played funk for my teacher, after that, my teacher looked at me very seriously and said, "What did you do during the break? Because this is not the way I taught you to play." And so by the time I was completely confused, I didn't fully understand what had changed. I even asked, did I misunderstand the music, the composer, or something wrong? And my teacher was like, "No, you played very well. You understand the music. But did you take lessons with someone else? Because none of my other students like this." By the time, I do not know why, but now I do. I definitely know it now. I realized that even without studying with someone else, something inside me has shifted. Some changes I wasn't even aware of myself. So, but I'm not dismiss this teacher. I share this story because we understand that we learned from experience and become who we are now. And maybe this experience you find not entirely positive. And I realize how important it is to keep learning. We can't search or move things, integrating ideas which we can combine, that we can help our students to not stick to, do not limit them like this. But anyway, both of us learned from people, learned from things, and also learned from experiences. So what I really want to say is we couldn't dismiss anything to what influenced us.
That's absolutely true. That's very true. Also, what you just said brings to my mind something else that perhaps needs to be stated, that I am assuming that you grew up in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know if it was always, even when you were growing up, but I would assume. And it's very big. I was born in a city that is about, that was at the time about 130, 140,000 people, but it's a very provincial. What in China probably would be considered a village. But also, I grew up in a different era. We did not have internet. But even before internet, we didn't have a musical library. We didn't have a collection of records. We didn't have a record store, you know. So to be exposed to other types of playing was extremely difficult. And so when I was growing up, the concerts that I could attend were only by local people, and very few. And very rarely, maybe once or twice until I turned 18, could I listen to people who were of any international relevance. That is a huge difference, because when I said that I found out later that my approach to piano, and I was talking specifically about technique and physical approach, was somehow a combination of schools from different geographic areas. It is strange because I never saw those schools. I never heard those pianists. I never heard Horowitz. I never heard, I don't mean live. I mean by recording, or let alone video, even audio. I never heard Horowitz. I never heard Cortot. I never heard Schnabel. I never heard, that all came later. And specifically when I finally started traveling by myself and started also earning some money that I could invest. I spent so much money on recordings, and everything I earned at some point I invested. I didn't know it was an investment. I was just curious. I just bought as many records as I could, and I listened voraciously. I discovered Glenn Gould when I was already 20 years old. And the first time I listened to his first version of the Goldberg Variation, I remember a friend in France lent me a cassette tape. I had a portable cassette player. This is how old I am. And she lent me this tape and said, I'll give you this tonight. You'll give it to me tomorrow. You'll give it back. So I went to my room, and we were at a festival. And I put this tape into the cassette player, and I listened to it all night long on repeat. And I couldn't sleep. I was really so excited. This is just to give you an example. So it's absolutely true that everything we listen, everything we're exposed to shapes us. In my case, what shaped me when I was, let's say, when I started until I was 18, it all had to come from within. I really believe. And of course, my first teacher influenced some of that, but mostly came from within. Then later, I incorporated everything I could find that I found of interest.
So how old did you complete your degree?
I was 18.
Wow, that's remarkable.
To me, the greatest thing a teacher can do is give you principles that then you can extract and apply in your own way and continue. So it wasn't like an instruction that went bar by bar, note by note, piece by piece. It was mostly these broad concepts that complemented what I was discovering on my own, and combined all together gave me the way that I play nowadays.